Oh my god, guys, it is Morbin time. It's finally time to unleash your inner demon. The Unholy dual wield DK spec is performing absolutely phenomenally on the beta right now. There is nothing coming even close to it on single target DPS, especially in bursts, as you can see in the background right here, as we burned down Sarthe 3 Drakes with this pre-raid semi-bis, where you have half pre-raid bis and half kind of mediocre gear. Now there's a couple caveats to that, where Unholy DK is extremely powerful, a lot more powerful than it realistically will be when we go live. And one thing is that there is a glitched out sigil that is completely busted. So if you're seeing Unholy DKs on different streams, on different YouTube videos, anywhere, and seeing them absolutely destroy everyone else on overall damage, or just in general on boss fights, do know that they are technically fully cheating for the most part. Okay, so what I'm referring to is the sigil of Frozen Conscience. Now this sigil is supposed to give you 111 damage to your icy touch, but instead it is bugged out on the beta right now, and it is giving DKs 111% haste. Not haste rating, but percent haste. So you have ridiculous haste right now, which is just gonna pair up with the dual wield Unholy spec and your talents in Icy Talents to give you 130% haste before you have Bloodlust, before you have Potion of Speed, before you have Manual Crowd Pummeler, anything like that. So snapshotting your gargoyles are doing something like 200k damage on some fights. Now this means most of the VODs you're watching, most of the logs you're looking at are not necessarily valid, because they are having a huge boost in damage, especially on single target fights, but on overall it's actually massive. But does that mean that Unholy DKs are going to fall off? Not necessarily at all. Now in this clip in the background, I actually wanted to test out not abusing this sigil, where I did actually cheeky try to use it with my gargoyle, and then I swapped off of the sigil. You'll actually notice as you scroll back on the right, I scroll out of the sigil. So I did use it to snapshot my gargoyle itself, which is the real huge cheese bit of the damage. There's a lot of actual information, and I'll show you that in a second, where I didn't use the sigil at all, but we were trying to get this boss down before the third Drake lands so he doesn't go immune. So we actually had to kind of cheese it a bit, but I wanted to see what my damage would be like if I wasn't using this massive DPS boost sigil at the beginning. Now again, the biggest boost is going to be to your gargoyle, and that's why it is completely busted. But even so, you can see as dual wield Unholy DK, if you have proper rotation, keeping up Death and Decay, keeping up Unholy or Ghoul Frenzy, which I can't do anymore because pets die on Sarthe, so you do lose out on quite a bit of DPS here. You do absolutely giga pump. You're going to want to make sure, of course, you keep up your dots and Unholy Blight at all times. But if you're in an ideal situation, you want to make sure that you have Ghoul Frenzy running at all times. What you're gonna do here is really giga snapshot your gargoyle, where you're getting Bloodlust, all of your procs. You can see I'm tracking them in the middle, and then snapshotting your gargoyle while in Unholy stance, using your blood rune and swapping into blood stance. And then you are gonna just keep up your normal pump rotation. Death and Decay, Ghoul Frenzy, keeping up your dots, and of course, keeping up Unholy Blight. This is gonna be crazy damage, and the snapshot on gargoyles, I'm not sure if it's gonna continue to work the way it is, but it is working ridiculously with haste. There's actually no cap on it from what I've seen. So if you are getting as much haste as possible, your gargoyles will just outpump anyone. Realistically though, where things really look good is if you're not using the sigil, if you're showcasing what the spec will look like currently without this completely broken sigil. And the big damage is really not only from this snapshot huge openers, but your sustained damage is massive and your overall damage is ridiculous. You can look on the meters on the right side here, and if you see the overall, I was playing half of this raid as Frost and then switching over and playing half of this raid as Unholy to test things out. And Morbin time just was unmatched, especially on single target fights, but realistically, even without the sigil, it is crazy. Now again, there's going to be a lot of doom and gloomers who are going to tell you not to run this spec because it's not viable without the sigil. That is absolutely not true. Running against another DK using the same spec and using the sigil while I'm not using it, I am generally about 600 DPS below them on single target fights. Now you can see on the right in this single target situation that kind of does probably have a lot to do also with playstyle a little bit. Neither of us are perfect at this playstyle, but I believe I am tracking a lot more things with my UI where I can track my own death and decay, my ghoul frenzies, and all of my dots to make sure I keep everything up and rolling. So it seems like when we are in a normal one-on-one situation, I was doing a lot more damage for the most part. So that might have quite a bit to do with it. Either way, without any of these sigils, running normal Unholy dual wield DK, Morbid Time spec, I was able to beat everyone else in every single raid I've done so far. Now, as a quick reference, let me just show you some of the logs for overall damage throughout raids. And you can see that Spoon is pumping 5,000 overall DPS in this first raid right here. If we look at this other log, we can see from Jug's log, another DK doing the Morbid Time spec doing 4.8k. More than 300 DPS higher than anyone else. And then if you look at one of my logs where I was doing the Morbid Time spec for half of the raid and Frost for half of the raid, I did around 5.3k. And this is being dead on Thaddeus the whole time. I am apparently atrocious at this fight going back into Nax. So this is being dead on Thaddeus, and I lost about 3 million damage just alone on that fight because you are super buffed up and he has a lot of HP. The spec that I'm running and the spec that I really like is this spec in the background. And the only thing I've changed from Whitewolf's spec is that instead of getting Scourge Strike, because this is a little bit weaker of an ability and you can use any other normal abilities to just use as filler, like your Icy Touch or Plague Strike, I chose to get Corpse Explosion because this really adds up on overall damage. This is actually a massive ability if you're running through the entire raid and you just macro it into like your melee attacks. And with that, I went with the glyph of Corpse Explosion, which usually you don't run this. Usually you would go with something like Horn of Winter, but realistically, you're spamming Horn of Winter all the time throughout the raid whenever you're running in between packs. So there's no point to run that glyph. It's pretty much always up. The only reason would be to keep Horn of Winter up throughout a normal fight, but you've also got other DKs usually running that glyph. The other glyphs I rock are Death and Decay, Ghoul, and Icy Touch. Death and Decay is a huge one, and Death and Decay is actually going to be in your single target rotation. You're going to keep it up at all times, so you do want to make sure that you are tracking Death and Decay. Another thing you are going to be tracking is Ghoul Frenzy because your Ghoul does quite a bit of damage. So you do want to run both of these things. Usually to keep up Ghoul Frenzy, you will do Blood Tap. Now this isn't a full guide on running the Morbid Time spec. This is purely just to break it down. And if you want a full guide, make sure to check out Whitewolf's channel. But I wanted to tell you guys that this spec is absolutely bonkers, and currently it is performing ridiculously well on the beta. One other thing I do want you guys to know is that in your offhand right now, we are running Black Magic in a fast offhand. I would also suggest tracking your haste procs so that you can snapshot your gargoyle really huge because it does ridiculous damage. Anyways, guys, if you want to see a full guide on Unholy DK for the two-handed spec, make sure to check it out in the description or something. I will have a mini guide for the dual wield spec, but realistically I am newer to it, so I'm kind of mediocre at it so far. And also Whitewolf's guide just goes over basically everything you need to know. I will have a short guide about it coming as we get more raid testing and more people are testing things without the right sigil. And I've talked to a lot of the top guilds that are testing things with their normal gear where they can't cheese things, obviously, because you want to test how it's going to be on launch, and they are actually still seeing Unholy and Frosty Ks perform the best. Right below them is probably actually Hunters, which again, I will have a marksman guide coming soon to showcase how ridiculous Hunters are in overall damage for Naxxramas. And then we've also got Shamans, both spell hands, and also elemental performing extremely well, and warlocks as well, just as the kind of top tier so far. And with that, I'll see you all on the next one. If you want to see me test things, make sure to check me out on Twitch. And if you want to stay updated with how every class is performing, of course, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want me to test anything else, just let me know in the comments.